All right, so my class is going to be on the subject of the tragedy of the French Revolution and the rise of the young Euro cults. It's going to be a bit of a downer subject, but it's in between. Matt's more, optimistic, and then Dave's also going to end on a nice cultural optimism note. So just to warn you, it is a bit of a downer because as Matt was going through beautifully, and actually it really fits in with my presentation, we kind of generally knew what we were talking about. But he focused on all of the positive Republican aspects of this so that it allows me to focus on what went wrong, basically. I'll start off with a quote. Sorry, it's a little bit hard to read. Whenever the government of the United States shall break up, it will probably be in consequence of the false direction having been given to public opinion, I should say. This is the weak point of our defenses and the part to which the enemies of the system will direct all their attacks. Opinion can be so perverted as to cause the false to seem true, the enemy a friend, and the friend an enemy, the best interests of the nation to appear insignificant, and the trifles of moment. In a word, the right, the wrong, and the wrong, the right. In a country where opinion has sway, to seize upon it is to seize upon power, as it is a rule of humanity that the upright and well-intentioned are comparatively passive, while the designing, dishonest, and selfish are the most untiring in their efforts. The danger of public opinions getting a false direction is fourfold, since few men think for themselves. That's a quote from James Fenimore Cooper in the American Democrat, 1838.
Do you have a lot of slides that I like this? You have to be. Maybe you want to cut the end, but it might be easier.
Not really sure how to do that, I think. Yeah.
Is that quoting one of the books that you guys have written?
Well, it's in a paper that I have, I've used it in several classes, but I don't know if it's in one of Matt's books. So I was going to say, it might seem weird to open up with a quote from an American in discussing the French Revolution, but I think after Matt's class, people have a little bit of a better idea of why this would be relevant, since clearly the French Revolution was something that was inspired by the American Revolution. James Fenimore Cooper was actually the second generation of the founding father generation, and he was not just a literary figure. So he was pushing for the development of American literary culture, not maybe at the level of a Shakespeare or Pushkin, but he was quite advanced. And he wasn't just a writer. He was, his intention was to also, he was part of the Cincinnati Society, and he was actually doing intelligence work in France with other writers like Edgar Poe. So people might be surprised to hear that these writers were actually very much involved in intelligence works, and they were actually working to try to help France succeed in their own revolution. Cooper's work is important. This quote is important because at the time, so 1838, France had already lost two opportunities to gain a republic. They had the first revolution of France had already passed from 1789 to 1794, and the second revolution in 1830. So we should ask ourselves, what caused these two revolutions in France to fail when the American Revolution was successful? The Americans had won against the most powerful empire in the world, one might say, most powerful empire ever, and had set a historical precedent. The French, such as Martin Lafayette, had fought in the American Revolution on the side of the Americans. It was thus natural that France was considered the next great nation to choose republicanism over monarchy and imperialism. It was for this reason that so many American patriots of the Revolution and the second generation worked in France to bring us about. So Cooper would know better than most what caused the failure of the French revolutions, and he warns the Americans in this quote that all citizens of a republic can fall back into chaos and despair, and I would argue we have, if we forget what makes the necessary foundation for a true republic, for the people, by the people, of the people. This lecture is going to focus on the reasons why the French Revolution failed, and as a consequence, unleashed Napoleon to the world, followed by the young Europe cults of Mazzini, and how all of this was paid for by the British Empire, and how this has also corrupted the proper idea and legacy of republicanism, which now today people are very confused about. And that was the point. Next slide. So the Reign of Terror would result in over 40,000 executions. This was conducted by the Jacobins during the French Revolution. It quickly descended into chaos and mayhem. The Reign of Terror led by the Jacobins, sabotaged any chance of France becoming a true republic, contrary to maybe some people thinking they were actually trying to bring such a thing about. One of the insane slogans during the French Revolution was that the revolution had no need for scientists. However, France was the first ever nation state in history under King Louis XI, who lived from 1423 to 1483. France, who had achieved great things during the reign of King Louis XI through the great nation-state projects, which made France actually a powerhouse in the sciences as well as the arts. France had sunk into a deep-seated corruption by the 18th century from a monarchy that did not care for the welfare of its people, and poverty and sickness abounded. However, France was still, at this time, a powerhouse in the sciences. This was due to France's historical achievements in the fields of economics and the sciences that would not have been possible without their creation of the nation-state. One very prominent school was the École Polytechnique of Paris. France was for centuries at the forefront of the sciences in Europe and held the most excellent universities. This is also why Russia, who didn't have a very advanced language at the time, used French in their courts and in their academies. So France was attracting the greatest minds in science and philosophy to live in Paris during this time, such as Gottfried Leibniz. Thus, despite France having an overbloated monarchy by the 18th century, it still had many great minds that have been educated in these prestigious universities, which were a continued tradition from its nation-state legacy. Also, a lot of these scientists who they had to be a part of the aristocracy, unfortunately, to afford that education, were pro-Republican. So they were allies to bringing about a republic in France. Many of these great minds in the 18th century, such as Antoine Lavoisier, you see in this painting with his wife, who was also a scientist, were pro-republicanism and wanted France to become a republic and remove itself from the yoke of monarchy and empire as the United States had achieved for itself. However, the situation in France, as was the situation in all of Europe, was that the educated class were among the aristocracy. The poor did not receive the highest quality of education. If they received any education at all, it was minimal. This was a schism that would be greatly played upon by the Jacobins, who promoted the slogan, "The revolution has no need for scientists." Antoine Lavoisier, an ally to the Republican French Revolution cause, would be executed by guillotine during the Jacobin Reign of Terror. The French Revolution had begun with the intention to model itself off of the republicanism of the Americans, but had quickly descended into mayhem. This would continue for years and would become known simply as the Terror for the amount of bloodshed it caused, again, resulting in over 40,000 executions. The French people foolishly allowed their best minds and their best allies to be executed merely for the class they were born into. Rather than attempt to lift up the impoverished and disempowered, they demanded that everyone be brought down to their level through the insanity of the Jacobin instigation. The anarchy of the Jacobin Terror left the people of France ultimately leaderless and allowed for the entrance of Napoleon. So who was responsible for creating the Jacobins? Next slide. Before we get into this, I want to share a few interesting factoids surrounding the Jacobins, and I'm going to go through this very quickly, but if people want more information, they can go onto my Substack, Through a Glass Darkly by Cynthia Chung, where I talk about this in much more detail. So one interesting fact that I recently just found out doing some research was that the Dominican order, a French Catholic order that was started around 1218, they had their headquarters. So they began in Paris with their headquarters at Chapelle Saint-Jacques on the street of Saint-Jacques, and they were the ones originally called Jacobins in Paris. So the Jacobins of the French Revolution that we commonly know actually took their name from the Dominicans. When the Jacobins of the French Revolution that we know of would be burgeoning as a new club, to accommodate growing membership, the group rented for its meetings the refectory of the Dominican monastery, the actual Dominican Jacobins. This is highly unusual and suspect, to say the least, for the Dominicans to rent out one of their monasteries, not to mention the very monastery that was their origin and base in France, is a decision that had to be passed at the highest levels of the powerful and influential order. For the Catholic Dominion order to rent their base to the burgeoning Jacobins, who did not seem like friends to the Catholic Church and its institutions, was a most strange decision indeed. And it appears that the relationship did not stop there. The Jacobins of the French Revolution merely rented the building before they did adopt the name. And there are a lot of apologists who try to say it was the opposition who gave them their nickname. No, the Jacobins clearly chose the name for themselves. They titled themselves the Society of the Jacobins, Friends of Freedom and Equality, and after 1792 referred to themselves as simply the Jacobin Club. So they were clearly not opposed to this association with the Dominicans. The Jacobins of the French Revolution would also use the former headquarters and fortress of the Templars as their prison during the Reign of Terror, where many gruesome tortures were no doubt committed. One can not help but wonder how similar the Reign of Terror was to the Inquisitions. All the more interesting when we know where the origin of the name Jacobin comes from and the central role the Dominicans played in said Inquisitions. There is also the connection of the Maltese Freemasons, who were mostly made up of the Knights of Malta. So the Knights of Malta are the Catholic Crusade militant order, and the Maltese Freemasonry is, the Freemasonry of Malta. So this Freemasonry of Malta was one of the first to be started with the whole modern Freemasonry movement, and it was started by the Knights of Malta. And again, they would have a connection to the Jacobins. There was a very influential Maltese Freemason nobleman called Joseph de Flamel, who would play a big role in supporting the Jacobins as well. So we have here now a connection with all of these institutions, and they all have been created or have modeled themselves, in the case of the Dominican order, off of the Benedictines. Again, this is a big subject that's too big for today, but people can refer to my Substack or even Matt's work on this. Next slide. So this is it's not really coming through, but this is the picture of the prison that which was originally the headquarters of the Templars. So once they lost Jerusalem, they set up their headquarters in Paris in this very large fortress. And later on, it became a prison that was used by the Jacobins in the French Revolution. Next slide. So the weird connections around the Jacobins don't end there. And again, it's important to ask, and it's relevant to know what are the weird connections around the Jacobins, because they did sabotage the French Revolution. And the way it was going, republicanism was spreading everywhere. The Republican spirit, the Republican movements were spreading everywhere in Europe, and France was logically going to be the next successor of it, especially with their role with the American Revolution. So the Jacobins are really responsible for playing a massive role in sabotaging this. We want to know what is around this sabotage that really crippled the Republican movement in Europe. So there are British origins to the Jacobins. I'll quote a paper from Mika Alpal. He says, most significantly, in November 1789, correspondence from the London Revolution Society directly inspired the founding of the Paris Jacobin Club. The London Revolution Society directly inspired the founding of the Paris Jacobin Club, and the Integrated National Network the Jacobins formed, consciously built from British designs. So that's a very big statement, which again, for more details, people can, I'll give more details, but there's always the written versions of this research. Next slide. Mika Alpal continues to say, the French Jacobins created their network in consultation with British models. In a rare surviving founding document, the Jacobins of Strasbourg, in their January 1790 Act of Union, described their organization as founded on the model of the Paris Société de la Révolution, created in turn on the inspiration of that established in London. Early Jacobins saw not just a common name, but a direct connection between French and British clubs. Certain Jacobin clubs, such as those of Cherbourg and Albi, grew directly out of literary groups. Even these types of organizations, however, have English origins. Diderot and D'Alembert's encyclopédie trace the existence of formal scientific societies to the Royal Society of London, chartered by Charles II as the first occasion when philosophers could assemble themselves to search for truths and peace, and arrangements spreading to France only several decades later. For those who are not familiar, the Royal Society of London is also known as the Invisible College. Matt has done some good work on this. Was run as an esoteric society of Rosicrucian Kabbalists that took over control of the English government after the ill-fated Republican government had fallen and the monarchy was restored in 1649. Rosicrucianism was inextricably linked to esoteric groups that were created around Benedictines. So again, recall the previous slide, the Benedictines were responsible for all of those other things that reformed the Templars, the Knights Malta, the Dominicans, yada yada. So interesting connections around this sabotage of the French Revolution. Next slide. The Jacobins would conduct a direct attack on France's nation-state legacy. France was the first in the world to create a nation-state under King Louis XI, and this allowed France to be at the head of scientific thought for centuries. France had created the best universities, and those best scientific minds in France were at the cutting edge of their fields, revolutionizing all fields of human knowledge. It was this legacy that the Jacobins chose to burn down. So this actually weakened France. In order to become a republic, you have to be more sovereign, you have to be more powerful, and they basically cut its legs from underneath it. The fact that the Jacobins were heavily influenced and not receiving a good deal of their instruction from the British should make one wonder as to whether this was the intention all along. Next slide. This is a lot of writing, but it is really important and crazy what Jeffrey Steinberg says in this excerpt. From the outset, the Jacobin Terror was a British East India Company, British Foreign Office orchestrated affair. The bloody massacre of France's scientific elite was systematically carried out by French hands, manning French guillotines, but guided by British strings. Jacques Necker, a Geneva-born Protestant slavishly pro-British banker, had been installed through the efforts of Shelburne's leading ally in France, Philippe Duc of Orleans, as finance minister. Although Necker failed to block France from allying with the Americans during the American Revolution, he did succeed in presiding over the depletion of the French treasury and the collapse of its credit system. And then this is the big one. Economic crisis across France was a precondition for political chaos and insurrection, and Shelburne readied to project its destabilization by creating a radical writer's shop. Speeches were prepared by Bentham and Jeremy Bentham, and translated and transported by diplomatic pouch to Paris, where leaders of the Jacobin Terror, Jean-Paul Marais, Georges-Jacques Danton, and Maximilien de Robespierre, delivered the fiery oratories. Records of East India Company payments to these leading Jacobins are still on file at the British Museum. So even their speeches were written by Jeremy Bentham, and we will learn a little bit more about Jeremy Bentham in a moment. So very clearly direct shaping of what the Jacobin phenomenon was from this certain aspect of the British Empire. The British Empire. There's clearly no French Republicanism. So Steinberg continues, Bentham was so taken up with the events in France that on November 25th, 1791, he wrote to National Assemblyman J.P. Gavon, offering to move to Paris to take charge of the penal system. Jeremy Bentham wanted to run the prison system in France during the Revolution. Enclosing a draft of his panopticon, which is his ideal prison, massive prison, proposal, Bentham wrote, Allow me to construct a prison on this model. I will be the jailer. You will see by the memoir, this jailer will have no salary, will cost nothing to this nation. The more I reflect, the more it appears to me that the execution of the project should be in the hands of the inventor, thus Jeremy Bentham, who run France's prison system. At the same time, Bentham was proposing to assume the post of his chief jailer of the Jacobin Terror, which sent many of France's greatest scientists and pro-American Republicans to the guillotine or to prison. Bentham made no bones about his loyalties. In accepting the honorary title of citizen of France, Bentham wrote to the Jacobin interior minister in October 1792, I should think myself a weak reasoner and a bad citizen, were I not, though a royalist in London, a republican in Paris. In other words, he was all for the Jacobin terror in Paris, but was not for it in Britain. He would always be forever loyal to the British Empire and the British monarchy. As you will see, people like Mazzini, who are credited also as true revolutionaries, they were also always pro-British Empire, pro-British monarchy. Next slide. So again, this is a lot to cover because it's actually pieces of a larger research that I'm doing on my Substack. A new sign religion, the rise of the modern Templars, and King Louis XIV. So Napoleon, once he crowned himself emperor, wanted to be the personal head of the Gallican Church, which was started by King Louis XIV. We're going to learn more about who King Louis XIV was, who self-dubbed himself the Sun King. The Gallican Church was, you could say, the French expression of Anglicanism, the Church of England. So, at the time, Henry VIII, he started his own church where he would be the head of this church. It would not be the Pope. So the Gallican Church was modeled off of the same principle, except, of course, it would be the French emperor who would be the head of the church. So religion is meant to serve the emperor and his dominions. Napoleon wanted to continue the Gallican Church as it was organized under King Louis XIV, the Sun King. In the case of Anglicanism, a new church was created, the Church of England and its empire, that was launched as a result of the insanity of King Henry VIII. As we will see later in the series, Mazzini also attempted to create his own church under the same fashion because he was successful for a short period of time as dictator of Rome. So to establish the Gallican Church from King Louis XIV, the self-dubbed Sun King, Bonaparte created this 1801 Concordat to deliver to the Pope, which makes Mussolini's Concordat appear nice and soft. Here is what some of the articles of the Concordat had to say. So just to give people a bit of an idea of the kind of police state Napoleon was building, the first consul, then the emperor, appoints the bishop. Bishops are forbidden to leave the territory of their diocese without permission of the emperor. The decisions taken in Rome need in all matters of church ruling, to first be approved by the French government and to be applied by the French priests and bishops. Teaching in French seminaries has to be in absolute accordance with the Gallican document of 1682 under Louis XIV. The bishops are compelled to give an oath of fidelity to the empire. The church has to renounce all goods and land seized by the revolution. Priests, if they can learn about any political conspiracy, are compelled to report it to the government. The French government can condemn and castigate the priests if they commit any misdeeds in the exercise of their mission as priests. So now it's not God who will be the decider, it's Napoleon. Next slide. As part of Napoleon's imperial catechism, he includes: the Christians owe to the princes that govern them, and in particular, we owe to Napoleon I, our emperor, love, respect, obedience, faithfulness, military service, tributes, order for the conservation and defense of the empire and its throne. We owe also fervent prayers for its salvation and for the spiritual and temporal prosperity of the state. Question: what should we think of those who refuse to fulfill their duties towards the emperor? Answer: according to the apostle St. Paul, they resist the order established by God himself, and they make themselves worthy of eternal damnation. Question: why are we compelled by all these duties toward our emperor? Answer: it is first because God, who creates empires and makes them according to his will, has established the emperor as our sovereign, has made him vicar of his holy power on earth. Therefore, to honor and serve our emperor is to honor and serve God himself. Napoleon would also order the Protestants and Jewish churches to be organized in the same way as servants to the empire. So he was God of all religions. Next slide. Around all this, so this is a quote from Jacques Cheminade, Time to Destroy the Mythology of Bonapartism. I misspelled mythology there. Around this, all kinds of mythologies developed about the Emperor Napoleon. The most significant one was a sun taunt. The sun of the Battle of Austerlitz was never going to set, and Napoleon was going to follow it toward the east to become the emperor of the two worlds. Remember that Louis XIV had established a similar cult. He was called the Sun King and had built a temple of Apollo next to the Versailles Palace on the model of Tiberius's temple at Capri. A direct challenge to Christianity. There is indeed something weird and rotten in the kingdom of France. And that's a picture of Tiberius's temple in Capri, which is kind of hard to believe that it was not known that it existed until the 1700s, after centuries of being there. Next slide. Here's a painting, which unfortunately, again, I don't know if people can see too well. The Orgy of the Times of Tiberius on Capri by Henryk Symiradsky, 1881, featuring the fusion of human sacrifice and bacchanalian frenzies of the mood. It kind of gives you the sort of, social activities that Tiberius was interested in his downtown. Next slide. This is the Fountain of Apollo rising from the sea in a four-horse chariot in the gardens of the Palace of Versailles, France, built during the reign of King Louis XIV, the Sun King. So again, for people who don't know, Apollo is also a representation of as a sun god. Next slide. This is a fountain of Apollo, what the fountain of Apollo looked like. So what we just saw, it had also these massive erected, whatever things there, looked like during the reign of King Louis XIV. Next slide. I hope people can see this a little bit, but yeah. It comes through. So this is Louis XIV as Apollo in the ballet Voyage de la Nuit. It is here that we should discuss the relevance of French Masonry and its elements of sun worship upon the reign of King Louis XIV. Next slide. So I'm not going to read this fully, but I'm going to just make the point. So during King Louis XIV's time, there was something that was exposed where there was a secret society that was formed whose object was for pleasure. I would say it's like hedonistic pleasure that they're talking about. And Louis XIV was pressured to banish this and the members of the order. However, a lot of the apologists of the official history, they always say King Louis XIV had nothing to do with it. We're going to soon discover that he did. But anyway, according to even the official accounts, they said that this secret society, whose domination was a slight resurrection of the Templars. So in 1705, Philippe Duc of Orleans, who is the brother of King Louis XIV, starts to collect these members from the secret society that were banished from the court, and he starts to reform them. There's a Jesuit father, Bonani, who fabricates what is now known as the famous list of made-up grandmasters that continued since Jacques Molay. So the story is, the Templars ended with the killing of Jacques Molay, their last grandmaster. So this Jesuit father, Bonani, makes up a fake list of how the grandmasters were actually continued on until the time of King Louis XIV. And so they try to revive what is, you could say, a modern Templar secret order, which now is kind of getting mixed in with what was the original Catholic militant order and all of the weird religious beliefs in that, and Freemasonry. But I'm going to talk a little bit more into what this new branding of Freemasonry was. So its object, this fake list's object, was to connect the new institution that was being set up by King Louis XIV and his brother, Duc of Orleans, with the ancient Templars. So they clearly wanted to continue this. Here's a crazy painting that King Louis XIV commissioned to portray his family as Roman gods in 1670. And you can see they almost look like twins. His brother there, who was directly involved with reviving the modern Templars. Next slide. So again, I'm going to read this because this is actually, there's a lot of writing, but this is crazy stuff. This is from C.W. Heckthorn's Secret Societies of All Ages. He writes, tradition says that on the destruction of the original Order of Templars, many of its members took refuge in Scotland, where they incorporated themselves with the Freemasons under the protection of Robert Bruce, which I used to like Robert Bruce. I was really sad to hear that wasn't a true Scottish independence. But anyway, so it established the chief seat of the order at Kilkenny. There is a degree of Prince of Vosbois de Heredin, or Heredon, as it is called in French. This Heredin says that there is an old manuscript of the ancient Scottish Rite in a mountain situated in the northwest of Scotland, where the fugitive Knights Templars found a safe retreat. So according to this story, the Templars did not, all die out. They went to Scotland for safe haven under Robert Bruce. And the modern order of Vosbois claims the Kingdom of Scotland and Abbey of Kilkenny as having once been its chief seat of government. King Robert Bruce endeavored, like other princes before and after him, to secure for himself the supreme direction of those associations, which, though not hostile to the reigning power, could be their organization become the foci of danger. It is the common opinion that this king reserved for himself and his successors the rank of Grand Master of the whole Templar Order. So Robert the Bruce became the Grand Master of the Templars after they went to Scotland for safe haven, and especially of the Lodge of Heredon, which was afterwards transferred to Edinburgh. So this also explains how there is such a thing as the French-Scottish Rite in French Masonry. Next slide. So Robert the Bruce, who lived from 1274 to 1329, was the King of Scots, who reigned from 1306 to 1329 and led the first war of Scottish independence, or so we're told. This was after backstabbing William Wallace and betraying him to the British. You see William Wallace here. From this betrayal, Wallace was stripped naked and dragged through the city of London at the heels of a horse on August 23rd, 1305. He was hanged, drawn, and quartered, strangled by hanging. He was released only to be emasculated while still alive, disemboweled with his bowels burned before him, and finally beheaded, then cut into 4 parts. After this betrayal, Robert the Bruce's betrayal to William Wallace, we are supposed to believe that Robert the Bruce suddenly has a change of heart and wishes to lead a genuine Scottish independence after sabotaging that very thing under the leadership of William Wallace. However, it is clear that this was no such thing. Robert the Bruce only strengthened the Scottish High Lords at the expense of the people, and it appears it was during Robert the Bruce's reign that we had the beginning of what would form the abominable Scottish Rite Order, an amalgamation of the French Templar Order and Freemasonry that would reinfect France and later on go to infect the United States, largely as a consequence of Napoleon's role as, I can't discuss here, but I will talk about this in my research on my Substack. It is also interesting to see that here's another example of a genuine movement for independence sabotaged by a fake war of independence, very much like what we see with the Jacobins, and it's the same network that's involved in this. Next slide. So just to make a point here, C.W. Heckthorn does that the philosophies of the Scottish Rite, which were different from the other Freemasonic orders, and it really was the Scottish Rite. There was a battle between the Freemasonic orders and the Scottish Rite, largely won out. Later on, the Aleister Crowley one came out, but they didn't exist at this time. So the Scottish Rite pretty much cleaned house during this time, and they were teaching, amongst other things, Kabbalah, magic, conjuration, divination, alchemy, and demonology were taught at these lodges. In 1766, the Baron Schudy founded the Order of the Blazing Star, in which ideas derived from the Temple and the Jesuits were strangely intermingled. Again, it's too much to discuss in detail for this class, but again, people can read more about it. This is a painting. Yep, okay. The consecration of Emperor Napoleon I and the coronation of Empress Josephine in the Cathedral of Notre Dame. So Napoleon basically crowns himself emperor This is known by many as the instantiation of the modern empire. So out of the French Revolution, you get now the modern empire model through Napoleon. And many people have called it a masterminded piece of modern propaganda. Napoleon wanted to establish for his ceremony, for his imperial reign and its new dynasty nobility, various rites and customs, such as the Carolingian traditions, the Ancien regime, and the French Revolution, were all presented in the ceremony, which some shots celebrate. In other words, Napoleon had an eclectic display of values to somehow justify how someone who supposedly held Republican values was nonetheless crowning himself emperor. Next slide. This is another painting by Jacques-Louis David. Jacques-Louis David is doing like pretty much all of these paintings because he was the best painter in France. So this is another portrait of Napoleon. You can see the Roman crown on his head, so clearly Roman inspiration. Hopefully people can see. Next slide. This is just again from Jacques Cheminat's paper. Again, there's apologists, just like for King Louis XIV, that Napoleon was not actually tied in with the Freemasons. He was, and his family was clearly tied in. So both Napoleon's brothers were members of the Scottish Rite, and although there's no definite proof, it seems Napoleon himself was also, because his son was referred to as the son of a Mason. The Grand Masters of the Orient were also being run by his brother. And basically, there was a battle between, the French Freemasonic order and the Scottish Rite. Next slide. And we can see that ultimately Napoleon decides to unite the two, and is acted upon like the Grand Orient was somehow the victor in this. It was not. The Scottish Rite basically was allowed to take over at this point under Napoleon. And this is just going over again how these people were controlled.
Is it British organs? It's in the
No, this is the right one. Napoleon, despite all of his arrangements and efforts, was probably not above this Masonic network, but under it, Venice, London, Charleston, which is where also we get Albert Pike, who was in charge of the Scottish Rite in the United States, played a sabotaging role in the Civil War, and also, according to Anton Chapin's research, started the KKK. So when these fools defeated Napoleon or shared at the Congress of Vienna, all were oligarchs, all Masons, all thought they had destroyed forever the French nation state. So that was always the intention, was the destruction of the French nation state under the model of King Louis XI and the economic model of division. Next slide. The British organs of Mazzini and the Young Europe Hall. So this is the last section for my presentation. There's a common saying, if the devil has a son, surely it's Lord Palmerston. Next slide. This is Lord Palmerston, who was the disciple of Jeremy Bentham. Again, the guy who was writing the speeches for the Jacobin leaders during the French Revolution and who wanted to lead the French prisons during this time. So Lord Palmerston was the disciple of Jeremy Bentham, and for 35 years, there was scarcely a cabinet without Palmerston as foreign secretary and prime minister. He was the most powerful leader of the British oligarchy in these times, between 1830 and the end of the American Civil War. Next slide. I'm not going to read all of this, but Giuseppe Mazzini is basically being funded by Lord Palmerston and the British East India Company. So like as we saw with the Jacobins, you have another supposed pro-Republican fight. Mazzini is best known for the unification of Italy. And of course, as soon as he gets power, he shows his true colors like Napoleon, and he declares himself dictator of Rome. So I don't think it's a mystery as to what Mazzini's true intentions were. But what's very important for us today is that we have Mazzini is what now governs the popular thought today in terms of fighting for liberty of any kind. And we are having a lot of disturbing Mazzini vibes that are going on, especially in the United States right now. And I'll get into why this is very concerning. So Mazzini's connections, his father was the physician to Queen Victoria's father, was a big thing. In 1831, Mazzini founded the Young Italy Secret Society, and he teaches that Christianity developed the human individual, but that the era of Christianity, of freedom, of human rights is now over. From now on, the protagonists of history are not individuals anymore. So it sounds also a lot like what would come, and, Karl Marx is involved in some of these young Europe cults that Mazzini started. This is sort of the start of what you hear in terms of the communist socialist talk that would later form like National Socialist type speaking in Germany and Italy, which, led to Hitler and Mussolini. And the words communism and socialism are very general, but I'm talking about the specific Mazzini branch. So we need to understand that Mazzini is actually a big source of the violent kind of communism, socialism, you could say also Trotsky type, eternal war type thing, but also racist. And this is why the Nazis and the Italian fascists called themselves National Socialists first. So Mazzini says that we're not to understand history as made up of individuals anymore, but peoples understood as racial nationalities. Mazzini is adamant that there are no inalienable human rights. There's only duty, the duty of thought and action to serve the destiny of the racial collective. Next slide. So again, this quote, this is all from what Sir Charles Palmerston's view. I won't read all of this. There's also being made the point that Mazzini, again, in his fight for republicanism and to destroy anything that he doesn't see as a fit government, applies to everywhere except the British Empire. And from March to June of 1849, Mazzini ruled the Papal States as one of the three dictators. They were all Grand-oriented Freemasons. During this time, he was planning to set up his own Italian national church on the Anglican model. The defense of Rome was organized by Giuseppe Garibaldi, who had joined Mazzini's Young Italy in the early 1830s, but a French army sent by fellow Louis Napoleon drove out Mazzini, Garibaldi, and their supporters. Louis Napoleon was also on the payroll of the British. Lord Palmerston said that Mazzini's regime in Rome was far better than any of the Romans have had for centuries. Next slide. Again, I'm not going to read all this right here. So Mazzini was on the direct payroll of the British, and we see this here. He enjoyed support by Lord Ashley, the Earl of Shaftesbury, a Protestant fanatic who also happens to be Lord Palmerston's son-in-law. Mazzini's direct access to the British government payroll comes through James Stansfeld, a junior Lord of the Admiralty and a very high official of British intelligence. Last year, Stansfeld provided the money for Mazzini's Roman Republic. Is there anything else in there to... I don't want to overlook people's information. So the next slide. So Young Italy was founded in 1831, attracting Giuseppe Garibaldi and Louis Napoleon. So even though Louis Napoleon was against them later on, they were all working for pro-British Empire interests, and they were actually overlapping in the beginning. Shortly thereafter, there followed Young Poland. Then came Young Germany, featuring Arnold Much, who published some material by Karl Marx. In 1834, Mazzini founded the Young Europe with Italian, Swiss, German, and Polish components. Young Europe was built as the Holy Alliance of the peoples opposed to Napoleon's Holy Alliance of despots. So you can see what's going on here. There was republicanism that was spreading everywhere in Europe. And in order to onslaught this and confuse people as to what was a true Republican fight, you had the Young Europe societies of Mazzini that started to spread and tell people that the fight was actually about blood and soil. It wasn't about a cultural fight. It wasn't about an economic, identity, a scientific identity. It wasn't to uplift the language, the education, the sciences. It was about blood and soil. This has seriously affected things today. By 1835, there was also the Young Switzerland, then there was the Young France, then the Young Corsica, which is very interesting because that's where the mafia was. And Mazzini is actually the godfather of the Sicilian mafia, which is too big of a subject to talk about today. But he did start the Sicilian mafia, just to let everybody know. And that also worked as a part of an assassination bureau network.
It's where they found the Corsican Mafia and the Sicilian Mafia?
It looks like it from what Webster Park is saying, but I don't know, it's too much. Obviously, there is direct links to it, just from the fact that there was a young Corsica, which was mafia. Then you have Young Argentina, which was founded by Garibaldi. So anyone who tries to act like Garibaldi wasn't even Mazzini, there you go. He starts his own Young Argentina, Young Bosnia, Young India, Young Russia, Young Armenia, Young Egypt, Young Czechs, plus similar groupings in Romania, Hungary, Bulgaria, and Greece, followed by Young America and Young Turks. And yes, there is even a Polish Mazzini group which is sometimes called the Vermont group. Next slide. This is the last slide for Mazzini. For Mazzini, a nationality means race, a fixed array of behavior like a breed of dog or species of animal. He's not thinking of a national community united by literate language and a classical culture to which any person can become assimilated through a political choice. For Mazzini, race is unchangeable and race is destiny. It is a matter of blood and soil. Each of Mazzini's organizations demands immediate national liberation for its own ethnic group on the basis of aggressive chauvinism and expansionism. Mazzini's war horse is the territorial imperative. Each is obsessed with borders and territory, and each finds a way to oppose and sabotage dirigious economic development. So the real nation state that was going to actually free people from empire and imperialism and the enslavement that comes with that, they were actually attacking the very thing that would free people out of such a system. Each one is eager to submerge and repress other national groupings in pursuit of its own mystical destiny. You're pitting everyone in an eternal war. Nobody's going to ever win. It's like everyone's it's like a police state which is managed by people self-policing. If you have all countries that are going against each other, constantly sabotaging another country's proper, direction and independence, you can see how the British have a much easier time just sitting back and watching the bloodshed. This is Mazzini's racist gospel of universal ethnic cleansing. So I have only 4 slides left about the next slide. So how is this relevant more to today? Richard Kalergi, he is actually the spiritual father of the European Union. He actually came up with the concept of pan-Europe, which the European Union is actually pretty much modeled upon pan-Europe. In his 1943 autobiography, he says the Coudenhove line reaches back to the 11th century when 2 brothers, Coudenhove, joined the First Crusade in 1099, when Jerusalem was conquered for the first time by the united armies of the Christian knights of Europe. They had belonged to the oldest nobility of northern Brabant, now part of the Netherlands. At the end of the 18th century, the Coudenhoves have been made counts of the Holy Roman Empire. So you can just see where his mind is oriented. Crusades, Holy Roman Empire, glory days. Next slide. So this is a picture of the flag. So the top 2 are the flags that was the first, and then this was the second flag that Kalergi had conceptualized for pan-Europe. And we're going to see in a quote of his that he actually says himself that the yellow circle is the sun, the Apollo sun, and the cross is the Crusade cross. And as we've seen as a theme, there is the Apollo sun theme. I forgot to also mention the Scottish Rite also have the Knights of Sun that also are continuing this Apollo theme. And in the European Union sign, they've continued the stars and they've removed the blank space. But to me, it kind of secretly is, has the Apollo sun and Crusader cross in the middle. Next slide. So Kalergi would write in his 1954 autobiography, and again, this is what influences the thinking today in Europe. It's very important, and it has also affected the United States. I discovered to my surprise that the feeling of European consciousness had first shown itself during the Crusades. After the fall of the Roman Empire, the Crusades represented the most vigorous display of European solidarity. For a time, feuds between kings, princes, and cities were submerged in a common cause. The first program for the pan-Europe came from the pen of Pierre Dubois, a court lawyer of King Philip the Fair of France, under the heading of Reconquest of the Holy Land. It advocates the setting up of a European League under the presidency of the King of France. This league would have 2 objectives. First, to ensure permanent peace with the Christian world, and secondly, to rally the armed strength of Europe for the reconquest of the Holy Land and the Mediterranean. That sounds kind of problematic. Next slide. He continues. From that time onwards, many writers and statesmen began to support the idea of pan-Europe. This is Kalergi speaking. Its greatest protagonist in the 18th century was the Abbé de Cynthia. He had two great philosophers as his disciples, Jean-Jacques Rousseau and Immanuel Kant. In the 19th century, it was Napoleon who first endeavored to unite Europe by force of arms. After his fall, the Holy Alliance created a pan-Europe of sovereigns for the prevention of wars and revolutions. Finally, in 1834, Mazzini founded Young Europe, a movement designed to coordinate all existing revolutionary movements with a view to building up a new and united Europe on a basis of nationalism and democracy. Don't be fooled. This is under the League of Nations, which basically recognizes about 6 world empires, with British, of course, always at the head, and everyone else as a satrapy of this. But they were trying to use, again, fluffy Republican words, but the actions spoke for themselves. So very tellingly, Kalergi writes, this is either 1943 or 1954, but he's very clear about this. He's pro-fascist in his writings. Fascism at the time in Italy had not yet broken with parliamentarism and democracy. So he doesn't see a problem, right, with fascism and democracy. He actually writes in his autobiography that he thought it was a tragedy that there were people who fought against the fascists because they pushed Mussolini was the true choice of a Republican fascist leader of Europe. Anyway, so he says, the new Italian government was a government of coalition. It respected the principle of constitutional monarchy, pretending only to give it new vigor and authority. It appealed to the heroic instincts of youth, to the spirit of sacrifice and of idealism. It tried to restore the respect for religious values and the glorious traditions of ancient Rome. It hailed the memory of Mazzini as a forerunner of fascism. So again, interestingly, Kalergi would write that Giuseppe Mazzini, who he considered the most modern organizer towards a united Europe on the basis of nationalism and democracy, was also considered the forerunner of fascism in Italy. And we are moving again in this direction because people think these words sound nice. So this is the last slide of writing and then final slide. So I have only 2 slides. In his 1943 autobiography, he continues, I chose the sign of the Red Cross superimposed on a golden sun as the emblem of our movement. The Red Cross, which had been the flag of the medieval Crusaders, seems the oldest known symbol of supranational European brotherhood. In more recent times, it has also gained recognition as a symbol of international relief work. The sign was chosen to represent the achievements of European culture in helping to illuminate the world. Thus, Hellenism and Christianity, the cross of Christ and the son of Apollo, figure side by side as the twin enduring pillars of European civilization. So Schiller would write in response to the French Revolution, which is Dave is going to talk about Schiller and, how do we get out of this mess of basically a crisis of ignorance that we're in today. Schiller would write, how could it be that such a pregnant moment, such a moment full of opportunity failed? This great moment had found the little people, in reference to the French Revolution. In other words, the objective condition for political change was there. They had the model of the American Revolution. They had American patriots in France helping them. They had their own scientists and leaders in France who were saying good directions to go in. But the subjective and moral condition of the people was lacking. And therefore, Schiller said, from now on, all improvements in politics must come through the ennoblement of the individual, for which he wrote the aesthetical letters as a new education of this. And Dave will talk about all of that good stuff. Thank you for your attention.